There's a moment late in the year when seasoned leaders start to feel something most people never notice. It's not the weight of unfinished tasks, it's not the pressure of goals still waiting on the board, nor is it disappointment or discouragement. It's something deeper, almost spiritual. It's the sense that the year has shaped you in ways you have not yet named. And before the next season begins, you need to get oriented again. This moment is not about being behind, it's about being aware. High capacity leaders feel it because they carry more than responsibilities. They carry environments, expectations. They carry other people's confidence, uncertainty, and development. And as the year winds down, their soul often knows before their mind does that a reset is needed. I'm not talking about a productivity reset or a goal setting reset. I'm talking about a leadership reset, one that clears the internal clutter, that brings your attention back to what God is actually asking of you, something that restores the integrity between your calling, your decisions, and your pace. If we've not met yet, I'm Phil Routley, and this is the 1% Leader channel, where faith driven leaders build clarity, confidence, and alignment that lasts. Over the last 55 years of leadership, I've noticed a pattern in the lives of leaders who finish their seasons well. It's not that they work harder in December, and they don't force momentum or pack meetings into the final weeks. They understand how to reset internally so they can lead externally with strength and clarity. Let me show you what this looks like through the life of a leader named Michael. Michael leads a national nonprofit with a big mission and a team he loves. The year had been demanding, not chaotic, just full. Strategic plans, community pressures, unexpected opportunities, a few things that went amazingly well, a few things that took more energy than anyone expected. But as the year came to a close, something interesting happened. He didn't feel discouraged, tired, or unclear. He felt crowded, crowded internally, not by negativity, but by accumulation. All the decisions, the conversations, the adjustments, the responsibility he faithfully carried, all the leadership instincts he pushed into action because the moment required it. He told me, Phil, nothing's wrong, but there's so much inside me right now that I don't know what to bring into the next year and what to leave behind. That's what a reset is for. Not to fix what is broken, but to empty what is full. It's not to repair exhaustion, but to bring order to the heart of a leader who has carried much. The reset begins with one essential shift. Before you plan the next season, you must clear the weight of the last one. The reason many leaders enter a new year already tired is not because they lack discipline, it's because they never intentionally close the previous season. They carry everything forward by default instead of by discernment. Leadership is cumulative. Experiences build layer upon layer. Conversations stack up and responsibilities multiply. Questions linger. Tensions go unspoken. Expectations quietly shift. If you don't release them intentionally, they follow you into seasons where they no longer belong. This is why the first movement of a leadership reset is release. Release doesn't mean abandoning responsibility or ignoring what needs attention or pretending things were easier than they were. Release means acknowledging that certain weights were for that season, not the next. Some pressures were meant to be temporary. Some decisions were heavy for a time, but should not become part of your identity. Some conflicts formed you, but should not follow you. There were some roles you filled that were necessary for the moment, but are not meant to be permanent. Some expectations were placed on you by others, not by God. Release is not weakness, it's wisdom. Psalm 131 gives a picture most leaders overlook. David writes, I have calmed and quieted my soul like a weaned child with its mother. Calm doesn't come from everything being simple. Calm comes from everything being put in its proper place. That's what release does. It quiets your soul by putting the weight of the year in the hands of the God who carried you through it. Leaders can't reset what they're still gripping tightly. They can't see the next season clearly while holding the pressures of the last one. So here's the first question of a true year end leadership reset. What needs to be put down so you can pick up what actually matters next? Not emotionally, functionally, spiritually, practically, because clarity doesn't begin with what you add to your plate, but with what you take off it. When leaders finally create space to release what no longer belongs in the next season, something surprising happens. The internal noise begins to quiet, the pace inside your heart slows, and in that space, you become aware of something you might have missed all year long. You grew. This is not about your team, your organization, or your outcomes. It's about you. This is the second movement of a true leadership reset, recognizing the formation that happened inside you while you were focused on the mission around you. Most high capacity leaders never pause long enough to acknowledge how they have changed. They measure their year by the scoreboard, not the soul board. They evaluate results, not resilience. They see the battles they fought, not the strength those battles built. But leadership growth doesn't happen in obvious ways. It happens in the unspoken spaces of responsibility. You grew this year in ways you have not yet named. You navigated challenges you did not anticipate, and you stretched into moments that demanded more wisdom, more patience, or more courage than you had at the start. And all the while, something inside you was being shaped. Let me show you what this looks like through another leader I worked with this year, a school superintendent named Denise. She came into our conversation frustrated because she felt like she should have accomplished more. But as she talked about her year, I noticed something she couldn't see. Every story she told revealed a woman who had become calmer under pressure, clearer in her communication, and stronger in her convictions. She'd been measuring her year by the results, but her real growth was in her character. When I pointed it out, she paused and said, I never thought of it like that. I just assumed the hard parts meant I was behind. But that's not how God works. God often develops leaders in seasons where the outer results feel disorganized or incomplete. Your inner formation is not always visible on your calendar. Sometimes the year that felt the most scattered is the year that grew you the most deeply. The problem is not that leaders don't grow. The problem is that they don't recognize it. And what you do not recognize, you can't build on. This is why naming your growth is essential. When you acknowledge who you became, your confidence increases, your emotional resilience stabilizes, your decision making becomes clearer, and your leadership identity becomes stronger. Identity clarity always precedes assignment clarity. Who I am defines what I can ultimately accomplish. Scripture confirms this. Before God gave Joshua the strategy for Jericho, he gave him identity. Be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you. Strength before steps, identity before assignment. In the same way, your leadership reset cannot move forward until you name the growth God has built in you this year. Here's a few questions to help you see what you might have missed. Where did I become more patient this year? Where did I become more adaptable? Where did I grow more courageous in conversations? Where did my boundaries strengthen? Where did I gain wisdom from situations that stretched me? Where did God form character inside me through challenges I never asked for? These questions are not about self promotion, they're about stewardship. You cannot lead confidently into a new season if you carry the old belief that you have not grown. And once you see your growth, something else becomes clear. Not everything you could do in the next season is worth doing. This leads to the third movement of our leadership reset, prioritizing what deserves your full attention in the first quarter. One of the most common mistakes leaders make is believing the next year requires more from them, but more does not create momentum. More often creates dilution. Your greatest strength in the next season won't come from expansion, it'll come from focus. This is where leaders must ask the defining question of the reset. What is the one outcome that will matter most in the first 90 days of the new year? Not your whole plan or your ideal timeline or the dozen things you want to fix, build, start, or finish. The one thing that God is assigning you. You'll know it because it's the place where your calling and your responsibility overlap. Your clarity returns. Leadership energy rises. Your team gets direction, and your future momentum depends on a strong start. For one leader I coached, the one thing was rebuilding team trust. For another, it was simplifying their strategic plan. For another, strengthening their communication pattern with their board. Each leader had a different assignment, but each one experienced something similar. Peace returned when they focused on the right thing. Leaders don't need more tasks, they need more accuracy. They need more spiritual alignment, more intentionality, and less noise. Proverbs 4, verse 26 says, "Give careful thought to the paths for your feet." Not all paths, not the whole map, just the ones God is asking you to walk now. The reset requires this kind of clarity. Because when you identify the single outcome that deserves your attention in the first quarter, the next season becomes simple, calm, and aligned. Not because it's easier, because you're finally focused. When a leader reaches the point where the internal weight has been released, the deeper growth of the year has been named, and the single assignment for the next season has been identified, something important becomes possible. You finally have the margin to hear what God has been saying beneath the surface. This is the part of the leadership reset most leaders rush past without realizing it. They assume the reset is complete once insight has returned. But insight without discernment still leads to pressure. Clarity without grounding still leads to striving, to trying harder. Leaders need more than clean priorities, they need a quieted spirit. There's a difference between leaders who move into a new year organized and leaders who move into a new year aligned. Organization helps you manage activity. Alignment helps you carry authority. Alignment is what turns good leaders into grounded leaders into calm leaders into courageous leaders, and courageous leaders into leaders others can follow with confidence. This alignment comes from discernment. And discernment is not analysis, it's evaluation. It's not strategic planning. Discernment is the practice of inviting God to speak into your leadership identity, not just your leadership responsibilities. Let me show you what this looks like through a leader I walked with recently, a vice president of a national company named Jordan. Jordan had an incredibly intense year. New hires, restructuring, scaling, hard conversations, a lot of forward movement. By the time December arrived, he felt ready to set goals, reorganize some systems, and push into the next quarter. But something felt off in him, even though nothing was off in the organization. So instead of planning first, I asked him a different kind of question. Where do you sense God is trying to get your attention? He paused for a long time, and then he said something simple and honest. I haven't slowed down enough to know. That moment changed everything. Not because he suddenly had answers, but because he recognized he needed more than a plan. He needed perspective. He needed presence, alignment. This is the third movement of the leadership reset: discernment. Discernment brings your leadership into agreement with God's assignment. Discernment filters out the noise, reveals the spiritual currents beneath the decisions, and restores the connection between the leader and the one who entrusted them with leadership. When leaders skip discernment, they lead from intensity. When leaders embrace discernment, they lead from identity. Isaiah 30, verse 15 says, "In quietness and trust is your strength." Quietness is where your spiritual vision resets. Trust is where your courage resets. Discernment's not complicated. It's slow. It's honest. It's reflective. It's the kind of space where God clarifies what he wants to highlight, heal, strengthen, or simplify. Here are the questions leaders ask during discernment. Where have I been operating under pressure instead of conviction? Where has God been forming something in me that I have not acknowledged? Where do I sense him redirecting my energy? What needs spiritual attention, not just strategic attention? What conversations do I need to have with more courage and less fear? Where did I lose peace, joy, focus? And where is God inviting me back to himself? These are not business questions, they're soul questions. And leaders who are brave enough to ask them enter the next season with wisdom few leaders ever experience. Because discernment does something strategy cannot do. It restores the leader before it restores the plan. When you embrace discernment, you stop leading from the weight of the year and start leading from the strength God built throughout the year. When you embrace discernment, you stop rushing into the future and start listening for God's next step. When you embrace discernment, you stop trying to force momentum and start receiving direction. And from that place, clarity becomes lighter, decisions become calmer, priorities become simpler, and leadership becomes sustainable again. This is why one of the most practical steps any leader can take at year end is a clarity diagnostic, not a performance review. A tool that helps you see what you can't see from inside your own leadership. This is exactly why I created the 1% Leader Executive Scorecard. It's not a productivity tool, it's a clarity tool. It reveals patterns you felt but could not articulate. It identifies places where alignment drifted. It highlights strengths you forgot to celebrate. gives you it gives you language for what your spirit's been sensing all year. It's the beginning of discernment, not the end of it. Most leaders are stunned by how quickly clarity returns when they see their leadership from a different angle. Decisions they avoided suddenly make sense. Responsibilities they carried alone suddenly feel lighter. Next steps that felt complex suddenly become clear. Gaining clarity should not be a solo process. This is why I offer the 1% Leader Impact Conversation. It's a private 45-minute call where we walk through your scorecard, identify what God is highlighting, and define the first step of your next season. Not the whole plan, just the step. Because leaders who move into the next year with the right first step rarely lose momentum halfway through. So as you stand at the end of this year, here is what I want to leave with you. You don't need to push harder. You don't need to prove more. You don't need to carry everything forward. You need a reset, a release, an honest recognition of how God formed you this year. a clear assignment for the first quarter, and a discernment to align your leadership with the voice of God again. When clarity returns, courage follows. When courage follows, direction becomes simple. And when direction becomes simple, leaders lead with confidence, not pressure. Stay focused, stay faithful, and lead with confidence. And remember, I'm always on your side.